books are great and that you can learn a lot from books. But to have someone that's been there, done that, boots on the ground with you I don't know if there's even a price to that.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Drew Pearson. You are listening to the Pearson Perspective. This is a deep dive into the stories and mindsets of successful business operators and investors. Let's go have some fun. All right, today I am so excited to have my good friend and partner here, Alan Ferries, on the show with us today. Alan is a self-storage extraordinaire. We've really had a lot of fun together, bouncing off ideas, and as we've grown our business over the last few years. Alan, thanks for joining the show today.
Thanks, Drew. It's a pleasure and excited to be on the call here.
Yeah. Well, Alan, why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of your background and how in the world you got involved in self-storage?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, my background, I don't know, in my early 20s, I bounced around from, job to job in the car business as a technician and service advisor, and wasn't sure really what I wanted to do. Realized quickly when you're working a W-2 income that you're kind of going to be capped at some point. And I knew I wanted to build wealth. I wasn't sure how to do that, but someone handed me the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book one day,
Great
and
book.
that changed my perspective on everything. I think a lot of real estate investors that book has affected for sure.
No doubt.
But just changed how I looked at my job. It changed how I looked at money. So then I just started thinking, well, what can I do to create wealth? And real estate seemed to be the most logical thing, because you don't need to have a PhD and you don't need to have a ton of money if you know what you're doing. So, just started buying some rental properties as I'm working my day job in the car business. And over a period of a couple of years, built up a little portfolio, 15, 20 rentals, just residential, and some duplexes, fourplexes, and then eventually, and was flipping houses. This is pre-08, by the way. So
Okay.
things were different back then. So I reached a point where I had enough mass where I felt like I could quit my day job. So I quit, cashed in my 401k, burnt the bridges, man. There was no sign of retreat for me at that point. I'm going all in.
That's awesome.
And all in the real estate. It was just flipping houses and keeping some for myself as rentals. And then, as we all know, the bottom fell out of the market. And to me, it felt like it happened overnight. And it's funny, early on in that process, back then tenants could get a loan just by fogging a mirror, and it was hard to keep my rentals occupied. And unfortunately, a lot of mine were in Class C areas, just tough areas to manage. And I'm managing these properties and trying to flip houses, and I'm taking all the calls myself, doing everything myself, which is, as I learned over time, you can't do that. You got to bring in a team to help. But learning through the school of hard knocks, I guess. Over time, I just had trouble managing these rentals and making the payments. Tenants were moving out. Tenants were not making payments to me. Meanwhile, I have all these mortgage payments to pay. Some of the flips we were doing, we couldn't sell, and we had debt on them that was not the best type of debt for a long-term hold. There were short-term loans, some of them. And so I had to rent them out, try to get some of those loans restructured. And the good news is I made it through the downturn alive, but not unscathed. I took some licks on the chin. Had to let some properties go, negotiate short sales, whatever I could to get out from underneath some of these properties, because it was just a mounting pile of debt. And I don't know, it was a scary time for me as a person. You go through a lot when you pretty much lose everything you have,
Wow.
over a couple of period. yeah.
So, what are some of
And
those long-term lessons you think you've learned through that hard period? Or what are some things you think you can kind of bring forward that you act on today?
well, one, don't try to do everything yourself. Um, Bring in some team members that are good at what they do and can help bring your organization to the next level. I was basically doing everything 100% by myself. There was nobody else involved besides
Mm-hmm.
maybe a contractor and a realtor. Um, so I really didn't know what I was doing. So a team, and then two, a mentor, a real good mentor that can shepherd you through the process. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Books are great and that you can learn a lot from books. Um, but to have someone that's been there, done that, boots on the ground with you is, I don't know if there's even a price to that. Um, so that's a big lesson there. And then some obvious lessons, just not getting over leverage, keep strong cash reserves. Um, now I invest for cash flow,
Mm-hmm.
and deals got to make sense on a cash flow basis. I'm not too concerned about equity, although I do look at that. Obviously, I think everybody does, but I'm not banking on it.
Right. Right. We're paying for performance today, not performance in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is kind of around 2010, 2012. Maybe you've
Yeah.
unwound or sold some of those properties. What's kind of been the next chapter in your career as we move closer and closer to the self-storage world?
So at the time, a lot of my contacts were investors, and um, I was, you couldn't flip houses. I didn't own any houses. I kind of get unwinding a lot of that. I was like, but I could sell real estate. I know real estate. So I got my real estate license in 2010 and started selling houses. And then luckily there was a group locally that I was connected with that were well capitalized, and I ended up representing them on all their transactions for about 3 or 4 years. They were buying residential
Wow.
homes, and we bought hundreds of REOs and HUD homes over a 3 or 4 year period right there. I mean, they just cleaned house, and I
Wow.
represented them all those deals. That was a blessing in disguise because it was consistent income for me as a realtor, because other realtors were out there struggling trying to get deals done, and also
No doubt.
negotiate short sales for other people. Because I knew the short sale business, obviously I had to do it myself, so I would negotiate them for other people too. Um, but fast forward a few years, I was kind of tired of the residential game and wanted to get into commercial. So I started, educating myself, reading books, looking for courses, which is hard. There's not a lot out there really for commercial real estate, at least back then. We're talking
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago. Um, so I found a real estate brokerage that was willing to take a chance with me, to learn the commercial side of the game. So I essentially had to cut all the residential loose 100% and focus 100% on commercial. So it's another example of letting everything go, burning the ships essentially, and
Mm-hmm.
stepping into something new, which I've done a number of times.
Can I ask you that
Which,
a question right there? I mean,
yeah,
that's such a huge point for so many entrepreneurs. Is I've done this a few times in my career, and it's scary. It's scary burning the ships. It's scary taking that big leap of faith. Do you think about that, or is it just kind of second nature for you? How do you think about those big course corrections?
that's a great question. Definitely think about it. It's a methodical decision. It's not made willy nilly. Um, but sometimes I think you have to do that because if you have a plan B or C, the plan A, you're
Yeah.
just not going to work real hard on. You'll know you have a safety net. And if there's no safety net, you have no choice but to
Mm-hmm.
focus. Is what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's scary doing that.
No, it is. I mean,
Um,
look, I did it in my brokerage career, and I moved to Michigan. Kind of had to burn the boats and move back home, and again, essentially starting all over for kind of a third time in my career.
yeah.
Well, great. Well, great. So now you're in the commercial real estate world, learning that whole game, and so let's jump into self storage. What attracted you to this business, and how are you able to kind of grow at such a great clip over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, in the commercial brokerage, you're representing owners, buying, selling, leasing buildings and stuff. And even that, after a number of years, you just get tired of chasing your tail and the big swales of income, the ups and downs. And, I got into real estate in the very beginning to develop wealth, not to sell real estate for other people.
Hmm.
So I said, I want to get back into real estate investments. And I don't have a lot of money, but I have some contacts that do. And I think if I figure out how to put those people together, we can figure out a way where we can share in the profits. So I started looking at how to syndicate real estate deals. Being a commercial broker, you see that side of the business a little bit because you're starting to see how a lot of these big buildings and huge commercial real estate properties out there are not bought by an individual. Majority
Hmm.
of the time it's a group that's purchasing these properties, and just figuring out how to put a group together. So I had to educate myself on that, and then ultimately I wanted to focus on one asset class. I didn't want to be bouncing all over the place, buying all different types of stuff. I wanted to be an expert, and I wanted in one field, and I wanted a property type that was recession resistant. Based on what I went through in the last recession in 2008, I was like, I'm not going to go through that I'm not going to go through that again, right?
Can't imagine. Yeah.
So I was like, what could I invest in that would weather that storm? And self storage just continued to always rise to the top. Any articles you read or research you do or people you talk to or investors, that's always the number one asset class.
Hmm.
The lowest loan default rate. It's got month-to-month leases that you can adjust with inflation or occupancy. So I really liked that model. I also liked that I could buy a property and run it without an employee on site.
Hmm.
And this was in probably 2016 and 17, where there wasn't a lot of unmanned facilities. You know, it's hard for most self-storage operators to get away from having an on-site manager at every location. So that attracted me to where, at that point, the technology was starting to come into play where you could run these facilities unmanned, and you could buy a medium to smaller size facility and run it unattended. Like, normally those facilities are out of question if it doesn't have the financials to support a full-time manager, and most people wouldn't look at them.
Right.
But now that you bring in technology and ways to run these facilities, where you don't need an on-site manager, now these smaller ones come into play, and they start looking like could be good opportunities.
So you were one of
Um,
the first people in Ohio to really utilize technology in this kind of unmanned and virtual style ownership of self storage.
it felt that way. There were some
That's
big
awesome.
players that were out there doing it, and I kind of looked at what they were doing and thought, well, I can emulate a lot of what they're doing. It's not rocket science.
Hmm.
Um, so we closed on our first one January of 2018. It took about a year. Once I decided I want self storage, that's what I'm going to go after. I educated myself on self storage. So
Hmm.
I read books, read articles. I hired a coach, like we talked about a few minutes
Hmm.
ago.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
One of the lessons I learned, right? Bring in a coach. So I
That's right.
hired a coach who's been in self storage for 30 years, and I paid for his time. And that's what it costs. It costs to get educated one way or
Hmm.
another. So he really helped me out a lot to get started and how to evaluate these facilities, how to set up additional revenue streams and stuff. And so we bought our first one in January of 2018. That was kind of the guinea pig, or the proof of concept is what I call it.
Hmm.
Can we put a kiosk there and implement a call center and run this thing without an employee there, and just have a site manager, stop by this facility once or twice a week for a few hours, and that's it. And some of my investors were kind of pushing back against that a little bit, like, well, I don't think, this is going to work, is what they would say. Or, the
Sure.
baby boomer generation doesn't want to use a kiosk or a call center. And I was like, maybe not, but I think you're wrong. So we're going to go forward anyway, because I just had confidence that it would work.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so that property took off after about 6 months. It was just performing great. I mean, it stayed full, raised rents, same old story. And I was like, all right, so now we have a proof of concept, something that works. I want to create, essentially, I just want to replicate that property over and over again. How many times and how fast can I replicate that property? So we went on a acquisition spree from then till now, basically. Um, just nonstop, just using all the same systems we did back then and improving as we go,
Hmm.
and as we go. But it's been a fun ride.
And so let's talk about, man, that's amazing. I mean, it's an amazing story. I think what really sticks out is your willingness to continue to learn. I mean, you've been nonstop learning for decades at this point, and
Mm-hmm.
and it's all been around the same topic, which is real estate. Constantly improving, sharpening the sword, coaching, mentoring, experience, repeat. That's incredible. Well, let's talk a little bit about your investment decision making process. How do you think about, if you're like me, you look at 500 deals, 1,000 deals a year, and you might buy 5 or 10. So, what are you looking for that really kind of separates the winners from the losers and where you're going to spend your time?
Well, I like to find something where we can add some value one way or another. You know, whether that's curing deferred maintenance or curing management problems, um, curing property inefficiencies, things like that, where we can buy it for one price, but it's worth a higher price shortly thereafter.
Hmm.
And that spread is really our safety margin, is the way I look at it. If I buy something for $1 million today, and 6 months, 2 years from now, it's still worth about $1 million. There's no safety margin there. So I got to have a safety margin where I can push that value through our expertise and create a safety margin. So that's the biggest criteria that I look for, is to be able to push the value and create that
Hmm.
intrinsic future value. Something Warren Buffett likes to talk about.
Yeah.
But I'm not so concerned what I'm paying necessarily. I'm more concerned about the value I know I can make, of that intrinsic value. And that spread is our safety margin. That's our insurance policy if something
Mm.
goes bad.
Mm. One thing that you've really done a lot of that I'm moving more into is facility expansions. Expanding. Maybe there's an extra acre of land and you can build another 20,000 square foot climate control, or maybe instead of doing boat parking, you put some covered parking or whatnot. Could you talk a
Mm.
little bit about some of the lessons you've learned in your construction, maybe some challenges you've overcome, and how you think about construction moving forward?
It's definitely a process. I'd never built anything, and some of the properties we buy, a lot of the self storage properties you buy, if we're looking for that value, that spread, like I just talked about, a lot of times the only way to get that spread is to add some other additional buildings on some, extra land that the owner has. So I had no
Mm-hmm.
choice but to learn construction. I could either learn construction and continue to buy some of these facilities, or not, or have to turn deals down that involved some sort of construction piece. I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, there's definitely, I've learned a lot, and there's a lot of challenges. Number one, it takes longer than you think because there's so many things out of your control. You can't control municipalities and zoning boards and townships, and there's just a lot out of your control. The weather, steel delivery. I mean, steel prices.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of moving components there to just
Right.
adding a couple buildings, or you might just add one building. So we're adding a 3 or 4 thousand foot building, or we might be adding 30 or 40,000 square feet. So it just depends on the facility. And we got a couple of those going right now in a conversion that we're doing also. But on all
Hmm.
those projects, they've all taken longer than we thought. And I try to push out our timelines, to be I'm always conservative, but um, just seems to take longer. And I would say details with construction, you got to pay attention to the details um, early on in the site plan development. Um, you just have to pay attention to those things because once those buildings go in the ground, they're there.
All
There's
right.
no moving it.
There's no getting them out. So I
Right.
got two kind of follow-up questions there. One is, let's say today you own the property, it's got vacant land, and you say, I want to expand. What's kind of your numbers at 12 months, 18 months? And then the follow-up question is, given what you know now, do you have a minimum expansion? Like, look, I'm not doing all this headache for 3,000 feet. It's got to be 15,000 feet or above, or it's not worth my time.
Yeah. So you mean on a timeline, like how long it will take?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Depends. I mean, I've bought properties where owners and everybody say, well, the zoning's in place, you'll be good to go. And that's never been the case. We've always had to, there's always an approval process. You're not just going to roll in there
Uh-huh.
and throw up a building. Um, Rarely does that happen. So, yeah, I mean, at least 12 to 18 months before a shovel hits the ground. I mean, 12 months minimum.
Wow.
Um, and And that's for even just adding a handful of buildings on a property. It's already zoned for self storage. I have two going right now in Ohio. That
Hmm.
property that has existing self storage on it, 20, 30,000 feet of storage, and we're adding another 30,000 or more. So we're doubling the size. It's already zoned. Still won't take a year before a shovel hits the ground. And that's because there's an approval process with the local townships, and then you got the county, um, and they're backlogged. They've
Hmm.
been very backlogged since COVID, and it's slowed things down. So you can only push people so much. And then the second part of your question, yeah, I don't want to buy a facility and just build one building or one 3,000 square foot building. It's just not worth the headache because typically you have to go through that whole process. It doesn't matter if you're building 3,000 feet or 30 or 40,000 feet. Typically it's a similar process. So
Hmm.
um, yeah, I mean, I at least want to do 20 or 30,000 feet probably for it to really be worth it. And you can
Interesting.
take
So,
advantage of economies of scale a little bit too. So,
right.
because it's the same process. You're going to have to hire an engineer. Um, you're going to have to go through zoning and approvals. You're going to have to find someone to erect the steel. You're going to have to find someone to do the site work and concrete work. And if you have to put in any drainage or catch basins. So to do one building, you have to figure all that out. You might as well go as big as you can or double
Right.
the size of the facility. If I can double the
Right.
size of the facility, that's great. And that what that does is that helps you, if you could pay, if you're buying a facility for 70, $80 a foot, and then you could do an expansion for 40 to 50 a foot, then your blended price per square foot is pretty reasonable and it makes the numbers work. As long as you continue to
And
have
that's our
strong
margin
rents.
of safety.
That's right.
Wow. That's great. You mentioned that you guys really went on a buying spree, for the last really since 18. Some things have changed in the world. More and more folks have realized that self storage is an attractive investment. Interest rates have gone up 75 basis points a few months ago. So, how are you kind of thinking about new acquisitions now, and what are you kind of seeing in the world?
Yeah, we're definitely in an interesting time right now. Um, but we're still looking at new acquisitions. It's definitely harder to make numbers work on some of these properties. Where interest rates are right now, continuing to rise every time the Fed meets, they're bumping it, 75 basis points. Um, and that's happened quickly over the past couple months. It hasn't
Hmm.
really rippled into the marketplace yet to where it's affected prices of investment real estate yet. From what I've seen, prices are still fairly remaining the same. Um, it's caused some buyers, I think, to fall out of contract for some deals and try to retrade on pricing because their interest rate is changing midstream of a deal. So I think it's causing problems right now. But we're still looking to buy. There are still always deals out there. I think we're just going to have to work twice as hard to buy that one deal. You have to make more calls, make more
Hmm.
offers, do more underwriting. It's more work to get to that golden
Yep.
nugget, right?
Yep. I think the easy
Um,
days of the last 2 years are behind us, unfortunately. But there's still opportunity, and that's what I'm really excited about.
yeah.
You know, as things change for me personally, we bought a lot of existing self storage businesses. As that window has closed, we're kind of shifting our focus to some more conversion projects. You
Hmm.
mentioned you're doing a conversion project right now. What has that kind of been like for you? Are y'all open yet? And how's that construction project come?
Yeah, we had a 20,000 square foot retail building right in front of a facility we owned um,
Mm.
that we just purchased, well, about a year ago. And it was brand new. The previous owner built it but didn't really put in any interior partition. So it was just a clear span vacant 20,000 square foot retail building that we bought. I thought, well, that'd be a great conversion project. He basically ran out of money. And unfortunately, it seemed like he just didn't know what he was doing and kind of got stuck. So we purchased it. It's been about a year, and we're just going to open for business here probably within the next 2 weeks. So it took a little bit over a year to get that project open for business. And there's just a lot of stuff that we couldn't anticipate with the building. We can inspect the building all we want up front, but there's just different things with the roof or plumbing or the zoning or the local county requiring us to do things that we didn't anticipate or even budget for. But right, it's a really strong market, so we're anxious to get it open, and I think it will fill up very quickly.
That's great.
Um,
And you already have the presence there, and you're already there. It sounds like you're going to do well
right.
on it.
Yeah, we have the property there, our management there. It should lease up quick and
Yeah,
would fold right into our portfolio nicely. So,
that's great. I want to kind of segue into another topic we've talked a lot about. As you've grown and you're close to, I don't know, maybe it's a dozen locations or more now. You've had to kind of think through processes and your team a little bit more. Um,
mhm.
how do you think about, building out a team and building out a culture?
That's something I'm learning every day. I think it's a learning process, but um, my goal is to replace myself um, so that I don't have to be involved in daily decisions because I'm typically the clog in the wheel if that's the case.
Hmm.
And I think that's really, as an entrepreneur, it's hard because you want to do everything yourself. And, in a way, I'm used to doing everything myself because that's how we got everything started. Um, so getting used to removing myself from the equation and delegating and training up people that can basically take over what I do. It's not been easy, but I'm working on that right now as we speak. And I think just company culture, I think just trying to communicate to the team that, we want to be excellent at everything we do. And
Mm-hmm.
by bringing them in to help build up what I'm lacking or what, um, I could do better at, because as an entrepreneur, you're doing everything. You're not really great at everything, but you're trying to
Right.
do everything. And you're
Right.
more of a generalist sometimes as an entrepreneur, um, like keeping good maintenance records of all the properties or tracking some of the KPIs and things like that. I can do a lot of that, but maybe I could bring in someone that really likes to do that stuff and that is really good at it and would do a better job. And I would have to pay them to do that, right? That's the challenge. Do you pay them? But you're giving up revenue, but ultimately it makes the company better. It makes the company stronger when you bring on team members where it's not the whole business should not be dependent upon you. If
Right.
it is, you don't want a single point of failure there. So
Right.
it's really just replacing me so the business can run without me, and just have a culture of excellence, of you know, openness, to where everybody feels like they can say what's on their mind, and to where I essentially have an open door. People need to get a hold of me, call me, text me. They always can. Everywhere from the local site manager that's sweeping out units has my cell phone number, to my operations manager or admin. Everybody can get a hold of me directly if they need to. So I'm fully available. Um, so I don't know. It's been a growing process for me, for sure.
Yes. I would echo all of that. It is certainly a growing process. I think
Yeah.
one of the biggest things I learned was, like you said, you're a generalist, you're an entrepreneur, you kind of have to do everything. And I wanted to hire another Swiss Army knife, and that's just not reasonable. You can't just say, "Oh, look, I'm gonna." If you were a Swiss Army knife, you'd be doing this. And so really kind of
Mhm.
defining those roles and breaking out those different seats in the company has been helpful as I've continued to grow and tried to learn more and more about this.
Right. And I think ultimately it's about trading your time for dollars, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, or do you want to work just because you own your own business doesn't mean you have a carefree life. A lot of entrepreneurs are working 60, 70-hour weeks, right?
Right. Right.
So we didn't get into this business to work 60, 70-hour weeks, right? So it's about trading your time for dollars, giving up dollars so you can get your time back to do what you
Mm-hmm.
want with your life. And that's what I've
Right.
been focused on in the past few years.
And I would even build on that as getting your time back so you can do what you're best at. And you know,
Hmm.
Alan's probably best use of time is probably not reviewing maintenance records. It's probably growing acquisitions, talking to investors,
Hmm.
talking to lenders. Those are the things that no one else can do but Alan for his company.
Yes, I agree with that. You want to spend time, um, not in those tasks, because those lower end tasks are important, but that's not going to grow the business. Reviewing, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
reviewing maintenance records and calling a guy that's supposed to do the weed control at the facility to make sure he gets out there is not going to grow the company.
Yep.
But
Been
someone's got
there,
to
done
do
that.
it,
Right.
right? Someone has to make that call and organize that stuff. But if you, as an entrepreneur, if you're constantly doing things like that, you are missing opportunities. You're missing
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to meet with lenders, to grow your business, to meet with investors, to meet with sellers. I mean, that's the most valuable thing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
So getting used to
Well,
delegating is hard as an entrepreneur, I'd say.
yes, I would echo that. Um, letting your hands off the steering wheel. For so long, I just kind of white knuckle gripped the steering wheel, and it's been huge. Kind of letting go a little bit.
Yeah, because it's been hard to let go because, like, man, they're not going to do it as good as me, or they might miss this or that. But at the end of the day, all that matters is they get the job done, and they'll
Mm-hmm.
learn as they go. Um, and just it's been a practice I've been working on for the past 6 weeks, 10 weeks maybe, to just let go and get used to just delegating and then just watching. Because generally nothing happens. Nothing bad happens typically. What's the worst thing that could happen? I mean, usually nothing bad, all that bad. That can't be reversed if it needed to be.
Right. And it's a good kind of
So
training opportunity. Right. Well, Alan, this has been a ton of fun today. I think just to kind of wrap up, I always like to ask everybody this question is, what advice would you give yourself maybe 10 or 15 years ago?
That's a good one. Find a mentor faster and try not to do everything yourself. We're not designed to carry all this weight on our shoulders that we always try to carry around, So I think just finding a mentor to help learn and build a team, bring on team members faster. Don't wait to bring on good people to work for you.
It's jam up advice. I wish I'd have known that 15 years ago, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, all right, my friend. This was a ton of fun. Hopefully we can do round 2 next year and see where you're at.
Yeah, that would be great. I look forward to that. So, I appreciate everything.
All right, buddy. Yeah, we'll see you soon. I would really appreciate it if you'd leave us a review on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere you're listening or watching to this show. Thanks so much for joining us on this audio adventure. Let's go have some fun.